And to Newswatch, well, today was the day when the left would finally get to say, aha, Gough Whitlam was actually sacked by the Queen. Republic now. Well, it all comes from in 1975, Sir John Kerr, the Governor-General, who was appointed by Labor, sacked Labor Prime Minister Gough Whitlam and his government to break a deadlock that was paralysing the country. We had the Senate, which was then dominated by the coalition, was refusing to pass the bills to fund this scandal-ridden government. But Whitlam refused to give it the election. He wanted to sort it all out. And eventually John Kerr stepped in, sacked Whitlam, appointed the Liberals' Malcolm Fraser as interim Prime Minister, immediately called an election. Well,
may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General. The proclamation, which you have just heard read by the Governor-General's official secretary, was countersigned Malcolm Fraser. Who will undoubtedly go down in Australian history from Remembrance Day 1975 as Kerr's Kerr.
Well, most of the public did in fact share that rage. Labor lost the election in a landslide, was smashed the one after that too, again under Whitlam. But Sir John Kerr was meanwhile vilified by the few that did get whipped up by Labor. The media smashed him as well. He was treated like an absolute leper.
I know what price I paid for what I did. I have no regrets about what I did because it was right. In the same circumstances, which were very special and unusual, I would do the same thing, with all the consequences involved.
And, of course, the conspiracy theories of the left started right away. Did you know the CIA was involved?
One of the big ones is whether, of course, the American intelligence had any role to play in prompting Sir John Kerr to do what he did.
But the biggest conspiracy theory was that the Queen was involved, had meddled in Australian politics, and that there were secret letters between Kerr and the palace, letters kept in the National Archives, donated by Sir John Kerr, that would show this if only they could come to light. Well, academic Jenny Hocking took this to court because Kerr had said, not for many years yet do I want this out there. She took this to court, demanding the letters be released, and the High Court this year agreed they should be. So they were released today, with stories in the media left salivating how they would show that the palace was involved and start off a new debate about the need to become a republic. Big fizzer. Joining me is Gerard, Henderson, head of the Sydney Institute, columnist with The Australian and author of the Media Watchdog blog, a man who knew Sir John Kerr and has followed this debate, this history, very closely. Gerard Henderson, what did the letters today actually reveal?
Well, nothing. As I predicted, and so did others, Professor Anne Toomey recently spoke at the Sydney Institute, said much the same thing. What was revealed today is what Sir John Kerr told me when I first interviewed him in October 1987. It's what he put in his book, Matters for Judgment, and it's what he's always said, which was that he did not want to involve the palace in the controversy, and that he did not involve the palace in the controversy, and that he made the decision on his own without any influence from anyone outside. Now, the papers, the palace letters today reveal that that's true. Now, as you mentioned in your introduction, there was John Pilger and the left-wing conspiracy about the American CIA was involved, and that then faded. And up comes another left-wing historian, Jenny Hocking, and she's got the palace involved. And in her book, the Dismissal dossier, she specifically states that the Queen was involved in the dismissal. The letters demonstrate that this is manifestly false, just another left-wing conspiracy theory.
And it was never really likely. Anyone who's got any sense of the Queen's history over the journey, she's not the Queen Victoria. She does not do that stuff. Here's one of the letters you refer to. It's from Sir John to the palace explaining what he's just done, sack Gough Whitlam. He said, I decided to take the step I took without informing the palace in advance. It was better for Her Majesty not to know, because the responsibility, he said, was his. Why didn't he let her know in advance?
Well, there was a crisis in Australia. You had an arrogant and stubborn opposition leader, Malcolm Fraser, blocking supply, and an arrogant and stubborn Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, he thought he could govern without supply. This was very much an Australian crisis, and Sir John Kerr believed that it should be decided in Australia by the Governor-General, which he did. Now, we were running out of money. Jenny Hocking makes the point there was a possibility of a half-Senate election. It wouldn't have resolved the issue, and even if Whitlam did extremely well on that half-Senate election, the votes wouldn't have been finalised till January, and money was already running out in November 1975. So he acted because he felt he had to, and he was a dutiful man, Sir John Kerr. He had certain standards. Some of them are probably a bit old-fashioned now, but they weren't old-fashioned at the time. And his view was that the Queen shouldn't be involved in it, and he thought the Queen wouldn't want to be involved in it. In any event, he'd made that decision. And it was the right decision. I mean, the idea that some of the left, like Jenny Hocking, has that the Queen's running around Buckingham Palace in 1975 saying, how can we get rid of that dreadful fellow, Mr Whitlam, in Australia? This is just complete nonsense. The Queen doesn't operate like that. And the suggestion all these letters went to and from the Queen was also naive, as anyone who understands Buckingham Palace would know. They went from Sir John Kerr to the Queen's private secretary, Sir Mountain Charteris, and that's what you would expect. And he replied, and sometimes he sent the Queen's best wishes, but essentially John Kerr was simply telling him what was on his mind, because he thought he should report to the palace about what he was doing as the Queen's representative in Australia, and that's what he did. But when it came to a decision, he didn't inform Gough Whitlam in advance, that's true. He did not inform Malcolm Fraser in advance either, that's also true. And on the 11th of November 1975, he made this momentous decision, but someone had to make a decision, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to pay the public servants, we wouldn't have been able to pay pensions, we wouldn't have been able to pay the military. I mean, the country was in a disastrous situation, and Kerr took a very brave step. The idea that he needed the CIA or Buckingham Palace is just ludicrous. It's just the kind of just ferments in the mind of left-wing conspiracists.
Now, Gerard, the last stand of the critics of Sir John Kerr, I mean, I heard Paul Kelly from The Australian say this today, he kept his plan to sack Whitlam secret even from Whitlam himself. He didn't say, I'll give you 24 hours, if you don't resolve this, you don't go to an election, I'm going to sack you. Now, I thought the explanation is given from year dot on this was perfectly fine. And that is, if he had told Whitlam this, I will sack you if you don't call the election, that Whitlam, and Whitlam had already joked that he'd do exactly this, would go to the Queen himself and say, sack Kerr instead, in which case the Queen's then got a terrible dilemma on her mind. Which one do I go and then get involved? Do you forgive Sir John Kerr for that?
Well, he did the right thing, because the Queen wouldn't want to get involved. And just imagine what would have happened in Australia in November 1975, where there was a lot of political tension around if the Prime Minister had sacked the Governor-General when there was no supply available. I mean, how would that have worked out? Academics like Jenny Hocking have never worked outside of taxpayer-funded institutions in her life, have never had to make those kind of decisions. That the country was running out of money. And imagine, and there was a great controversy on, and the Governor-General is sacked by the Prime Minister because the Prime Minister can't get money through the Senate. This would have been disastrous in Australia as well.
Wouldn't have solved nothing,
shocking.
Absolutely
and it wouldn't have solved
nothing.
the problem. No.
I know. I just think people are so in denial. They don't want... Look, reading through the letters, right, it seems to me that Kerr, and we should remember this is a working class guy, worked his way up to be Chief Justice of New South Wales, you know, he was a Labor man originally. He was, to me, a man who was in fact trying his level best to keep the monarchy out of politics, which is what Republicans want, isn't it? Trying his very best for Australia. You knew him. Are you sorry about the vilification this man got?
Well, it's what happens when you're unfashionable and you get a pile on by by the left in this country. It was an early example of that. We've had a more recent example. But look, all I know is I spoke to him a lot. He did like reassurance. He liked people telling him he did the right thing. He lost a lot of friends. He suffered massive ridicule. He lost money. He lost eventually his position because he had to retire earlier than he otherwise would have attended. But I would say one thing. Until the day he died, Sir John Kerr said he did the right thing, and if he had the opportunity to do it again, in spite of everything that was thrown at him, he said he would have done it again because he did the right thing. And looking back, what else could he have done? And it wasn't the first time a governor had dismissed a political leader in Australia. It happened when Sir Philip Game dismissed Jack Lang in New South Wales in 1932, and what was done in 1975 wasn't much different from what was done in 1932. So Sir John Kerr suffered a heck of a lot, but he went to his grave knowing that he did the right thing by Australians. And what happened was Malcolm Fraser won the next 3 elections, and then after a short period, Bob Hawke came back, and the whole political balance was restored. The idea that this was the end of the Australian Constitution, the end of Australian democracy, as many on the left said, was absolute nonsense. Within 10 years, Labor was back in a long-serving government led by Bob Hawke and Paul Keating.
And a better government, and a better government that learned the lessons from Gough Whitlam's many, many mistakes. Gerard Henderson, thank you so much for your time.